enjoyed it and got it. And understandably, there was quite a few people that it was quite new information or, stuff that they hadn't experienced. And yeah, some of you found it quite hard to comprehend, which is completely understandable. So we are continuing in a more maybe grounded, using maybe some language that's a bit more understandable today. So last time we were talking about waking up. So we were talking about, waking up in a spiritual sense. So yeah, exploring a bit more today, how to ground a bit more. How are you, Andrew?
Doing well.
Yeah.
It's good to see you again.
You too. Did you enjoy last week's conversation?
I did.
Yeah.
I love the jam. But of course, we want to do stuff that resonates with people. And so I'm excited for tonight and grounding it. And so I'll follow your lead. I got no idea what we're going to talk about, and that's great.
Yeah. Well, something that comes up a lot, I know definitely with the people that I coach, and I'm sure with you as well, Andrew, is, and we hear this out in the world a lot, is people talk about loneliness a lot and disconnection. And, there's this search, probably more and more at the moment for connection, for wholeness. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, a lot of it is about not wanting to feel lonely, not wanting to be lonely.
Yeah.
And so how this can tie in with what we talked about last week is, last week we were more in the spiritual waking up, as in the experiences that might be experienced. And, what we could look at within this, the way that it ties in, is loneliness, is a thing that is felt by many people. But some people can really benefit from hearing it in this way. And the way that we might talk about it this evening is around, loneliness being something that is felt through body, but firstly thought through mind.
Okay. Yeah, great. Do you want to talk about how loneliness might change and metamorphosize in one's life as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think for me, a really good example of my experience with people was really a lot of it was during COVID. So we're going back, 4 or 5 years now. And loneliness was quite a big thing for some people that were locked down on their own. So I was coaching many people at that time that were in those situations. There was a big frustration with being locked in, some of them living on their own and experiencing this thing that we call loneliness. And as I worked with many of these people, what we came to find is that the loneliness that was being experienced is not to take away that this was a major thing for people, but how we worked on helping them to kind of pain themselves less with what was inevitable, let's say at the time, was really working on how they were thinking their way into loneliness. Yeah, so there was a voice, as we have this voice in our head, our mind, monkey mind, and whatever you want to call it, that runs on repeat for nearly all of us, most of us, throughout our days. And at that particular time, that voice for some people became a lot louder and a lot clearer because there wasn't as many distractions of going out and being around people as much.
Right.
And so the work that we did together was really working on getting to know what that voice was saying. And a lot of that was around how, they were unhappy, they were running, say, worst case scenarios, and how it was really lonely to not be able to see people. And so what that would create then was the thinking of being lonely to then feelings in the body, sensations. So often we will say, I feel lonely, but we won't, we'll be thinking it and then we might feel something in the body or not, because it's a very common phrase to say I feel lonely without actually really understanding what loneliness is and how it's actually experienced within our internals. So what loneliness can lead to is, people may say I feel really disconnected. I don't feel whole, maybe. There's this missing, this sense of something missing. And we can often attribute that to it needing to be another person, it needing to be something else, because we don't realize that it's actually us that is creating this sense of loneliness within us. And there's plenty of people, and people may be able to resonate with this, but that live with someone that may, I've heard people saying that they've never been as lonely as when they've been lying in bed next to someone, maybe even felt more at peace or whatever when they've been on their own. So that's something that comes up quite a bit. I don't know whether that anything to say to that, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways that we could go with this. Maybe if we actually just go right back to the start, one thing that I often say in, some of the leadership sessions that I run is that it's amazing that, in the general population, 25% of people would describe themselves as being significantly lonely. That's quite staggering. And I often wonder how they do.
More, right? I don't. Yeah.
Right. Well, exactly. That's where I was going to go because. Yeah, because A, how do they define the meaning of loneliness? B, I wonder how they actually do the sampling of this stuff. But in any case, science aside, that's a staggering number. That's as many people or more than people who are anxious, which baffles me. But yeah, loneliness, I think, starts right at birth. Carl Jung sort of said this beautifully. We're in this safe, comfortable environment of the womb, and all of a sudden we're birthed into this unfamiliar reality. It's cold. There's bright lights. There's unfamiliar stimulation coming from everywhere. And all of a sudden we're out of the safety that we previously had in the womb. And it's quite staggering. We're already cognizing everything that's going on or thinking about things that are going on. And so it starts right from day one, separation and loneliness. And so I don't know, let's follow a few different threads.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's that's it. It's like there's this sense then that we are now somehow disconnected, which we are because we were connected to, our mother, we had even a cord that connected us.
Cord. Yeah.
So it's potentially, that sense of now feeling disconnected, but obviously at that age, we're not necessarily in the cognition that we are today to be able to language it. So after however many months, maybe years even, we now then start to be able to place some language around it. And now we're, feeling that there's something missing, thinking that there's something missing, and there's a sense of what's going on now, what's wrong.
Well, let's even build it up if you don't mind. So at about the age of 1.5 to 2.5, we're developing what's called our attachment maps. A lot of people will be familiar with attachment styles. It's been a big thing for the last 6 or 7 years. My mentor wrote the book on it, on how to do therapy around attachment disturbances. And it's pretty simple, even at the age of 2, you can tell whether a person's going to be experiencing some form of loneliness or whether they're happy in their own company. And so it's really interesting because they set up these situations in the testing for this. And, some kids were quite happy for mum to walk out of the room and not be present when the child was playing. Other kids, when they're playing with their blocks, they're constantly looking for mum to validate that the attention's there and that they're safe. And so this is more the anxious side, and perhaps the avoidant side is where they're totally happy playing by themselves. There's nothing going wrong with mum, exiting the room. So it starts so early. And, for a lot of people, they might experience some interesting anxieties through the adolescent ages, through the young school ages, etc. But that sort of stuff's set down really, really early. And then it can come back later on in life. People can sort of say to themselves, I feel numb. I feel like there's a void in my life. I feel like something's missing, but I don't know what it is. I feel better when I'm around people. It can just take so many different forms.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, where we can fall into problems, and we do fall into problems, is that we then believe that the answer to our problems is in relationships. And this isn't to discount wanting a relationship if you're not in one, or if you want a different one because you are in one. And, but this is kind of the suffering of us as human beings, is that, suddenly it's like, there's this, and even not suddenly, if we're experiencing this from a young age, then potentially we're going to be clinging on to people, whether it's, friends at school, whether it's, want relationships as we begin to get older, romantic relationships. And, people can really suffer this because it's like the expectation is that you are going to make me whole because I don't feel whole, without necessarily knowing this. And then the minute that we get any sort of rejection, or someone, doesn't want to play with us or date us, let's say, then it's triggering back all of those wounds that have been deeply set within us, but we can't make sense of it. So then we just keep searching or keep going back to that same person because we believe that they are the ones that are suddenly going to make us feel this complete, whole, unlonely self. And that's when we can fall into those problems of, well, I'm in a relationship, I'm lying next to bed, lying in bed next to someone, and I feel really lonely. Why, and I can't understand why that would be. I'm with someone. This is all that, this is meant to be. And now it's your fault that I'm feeling lonely. And, the suffering continues. So,
yeah, totally. Yeah, So loneliness is experienced internally and through the mind by you and only you. Nobody can make you lonely or connected. You're the person that's making the meaning around this stuff. Yeah, I think that's what you were saying. Just more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's,
directly.
I've been noticing quite a lot. I mean, I've noticed this a lot, but it seems to have come up quite a bit recently in coaching, where we're talking about whoever the person is dating, whoever they might be married to. And it's very interesting that most of the time, the person that we're with is someone that is different from us. So we don't necessarily date the same personality type as us. And just again this week, that reminder of that, as I've had clients going, oh no, I'm the people pleaser, and the wife or the husband is really disagreeable, kind of the opposite. And again, is that reminder every time that it's like whatever's missing in us, we go out in the world to try and find that, because we don't believe that we hold those attributes within ourselves. So we blindly, a lot of the time, we'll pick people that we hope is the answer to completing us, which can be all very well and nice for a little while, but then there's times where that doesn't go so well and we're so different, and that's where we can also get ourselves into problems. So it's like we're on this constant search through life of this thing to save us, as I like to say, to complete us. And because no one ever taught us all of this stuff that happened at birth, that we would have absolutely acknowledged that, but we couldn't obviously language it. And most adults, a lot of people, can kind of disregard those sort of things that happened to us early on and go, that can't be the reason why I'm like this right now when I'm 40 years old. That's ridiculous. But it's not. It's actually what's really true about being human.
Yeah, it's totally being human. So we have these drives. We want to belong. We want to be accepted in the group that we're in. We want to feel worthy. We want to feel safe, etc. And I think that's the root of the perception of loneliness. I know for myself, I would never have, really described myself as being lonely, but, through the school age, there was certainly a sense in some situations that I didn't really belong or didn't fit in or just felt a little bit odd. Firstly, I was super short. Second of all, I wasn't really a cool kid. So, I didn't feel as though I was part of the in-group, etc. At later stages, when I was playing cricket for some teams, I felt like I fitted in. For other teams, I didn't feel like I really fit in. So I felt like I needed to achieve more in order to be accepted. And some people would describe that as loneliness. Other people would describe it in a different way. It's up to people to make their own meaning. And then I reckon...
What was your experience like? What word would you put on it?
Embarrassment and shame, 100% in terms of the emotional sort of content of it. I remember I dropped a catch one day, on the cricket field. And this is even when I was like 21, so I wasn't 10. But I dropped a catch and it was an absolute sitter. And, my teammate who was bowling at the time, he just ripped into me, like in front of everyone. And I just sat there and I thought, far out. Like, am I really in this team? Like, am I part of this team? Or you kind of want to get in the car and drive off and leave them to it, So it comes in so many different forms. I'd say for me also just a personal experience of it. It can be, you could feel emotionally lonely. You could feel psychologically lonely. So, if you feel as though you have certain thoughts that other people don't have, you can feel like you don't fit in. Nobody understands me, whatever it is, insert here. If you're physically different, you can feel like you're lonely because people can't identify with your physical experience of the world. Certain people that we've had as clients as well are very spiritually perhaps unique, and they've felt at certain times like they're lonely. It can just take so many different shapes and forms.
Yeah. And I think that's it, isn't it? It's like the way it can tie in with what we were talking about last week is like, some people that do experience and are connected, let's say, to, beyond this life, which can sound weird for people, but other realms and things like that, their connection is there in that. But then the minute they wake up or come back into this reality, this day to day, it's a lonely place. They'll often say, I haven't got anyone to talk to about this. People think I'm weird. So it's lonely until they kind of reach back into whatever dimensions, they're actually connecting into. So it's a big one.
Well, even getting back to what you were saying before to keep it grounded for a little bit longer, I think that sense of, Tony Robbins used to say there's this balance of significance and connection, he used to call it. And, some people prefer the significance. They prefer to be individualists. They prefer to strive on behalf of their own betterment. Others are more bonding in their nature and they want to feel a connection. They're not really worried about their own egoic needs. And this, there's two poles there, if you like. And Tony used to talk about that all the time. As I've sort of done this work, I've sensed that people actually want both. It's just that on the surface or the appearances, they appear to prefer one or the other. And some people feel significant when they are connected. And some people feel connected when they feel individually significant. And so it's totally down to how we make meaning out of this stuff. And I think, like a little prelude into what you were saying there, if we're reaching for it outside, we can feel connected to places like beautiful nature or an art gallery or just, whatever places. We can feel connected to people. We can feel connected to things. People have got valuable objects like, a photo of my grandma, for example. I love that photo because it brings back memories. So connected to activity. There can be so many different variations.
But what's the key in all of those, Andrew?
But the key in all of them is that it's requiring something external to you to feel a certain way about you. And so
how do you feel that way about you? What is it about? So when you're in any of those examples you just gave, what's the difference to not being in?
Okay, so if we're going to me specifically, and not some abstract.
Yeah.
So I would sort of, when I feel
not that thing that's making us feel that. So what's the key to it? Yeah.
Yeah. When I feel connected, it's more like a flow, more like being present, being fully immersed in whatever it is, whether it's people, places, things, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. So going back to the start of what I was saying, it's the mind, right? Yeah. If we're not talking to ourselves about us being lonely or disconnected or individual or, whatever that story is insignificant, then there's nothing. There's just, and, we can believe that nature is doing it to us. But as we step onto that beach or into that forest, as we're taking in all of that, it's us that's taking it all in. It's not it that's taking us in. It's us allowing ourselves to be there. I mean, there could be people walking, into a forest and they're still telling themselves they're lonely in this forest, so it's not the place, it's the meaning again, or the state that we allow ourselves to get into, flow, if that's what it is, presence, that determines the lonely or the not lonely, let's say, the connected versus distant.
Totally. Yeah. Well, here's the other thing. This has only really become a part of my existence in the past couple of years, but I took what you said and played with it a bit. And, I was very externally oriented for a long, long time. And it's only recently where I've got the balance between the internal world and, the external world. It's very true for me now that, I don't really need too much connection from the external world because there's so much going on just here that I feel like I could entertain myself for 1,000 years, and actually during the meditation last night, one of our clients, described her meditative experience, and she was describing, this scene on her computer monitor. And, essentially she was overlaying her own inner unconscious world onto the computer screen that was in front of her. And she was describing all these images and da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, well, that's not emptiness, but it's a projection. But what's amazing about it is that there was richness coming from her unconscious and her shadow material being put out right in front of her for her to make meaning on. And that sort of stuff is fascinating.
That's what we're doing all the time.
It's what we're doing all the time.
When we see that beautiful forest, we are constructing that forest in mind. It's not actually there. We won't necessarily get into that because that's going to be a bit too much, but it's same, right? It's,
same. But, working with that, like my wife in her dreams the other night, I think it was last night or the night before, she was describing them to me and she's like, I was back at home in England and, slithering up the cobblestones was a whole bunch of white fluffy snakes. And first of all, my wife has just some of the most bizarre dreams, but it's amazing to hear them because they're always so weird. They're just weird. And, I'm just playing with it and I'm like, okay, so what meaning did you make out of these white snakes? But, you could spend a lifetime with yourself and be totally fully connected, just exploring this kind of material.
For sure. And eventually not needing it all to be so noisy.
And eventually not needing it.
And just being quiet with it. So, yeah, it depends on your personality type. Some personality types prefer the peace. Others prefer a bit of excitement. So they're going to make, a bit more exciting in mind. But it is true. It's whatever we're choosing. And I think that's the key thing. It's like, with all of what we've said, for anyone that's listening within this that may be experiencing this loneliness, what's the first step in all of this? It's to really start to have awareness of what we are running in mind. And this is the key to it. This isn't about judging self for it, because often we can, this can be quite uncomfortable to hear this. And then it's like, now I'm going to blame myself for the fact that I'm lonely, but it's not me. It's not my fault. It's whoever's fault out there that isn't giving me the attention that I need. And this is not, this isn't about blaming them, but it's also not about blaming selves. It's about seeing that this is stuff that no one has ever taught us. Like, I've heard about this in the last few years, and I've lived, how many years before that, in total belief of loneliness being, a real thing, and not having much awareness of what the mind is doing to contribute to that. So the really key with all of this stuff, because people may be quite confronted listening to this, is it's not about blaming yourself. It's simply about having a look at what's running in your mind. And for some people, it's very relevant to be able to piece that back to the possibility that it's right from birth, let's say, that this has happened. For other people, it might be that you do have some memories from quite a young age where you were made to feel lonely, let's say, because of certain situations that happened. You may have been left at home while your parents went out to work. You experienced loneliness, and not because they meant to make you feel lonely, but that was just the circumstances at the time. So it's pulling on, if you've got memories of where this might have started, that's a really great place to go. So, we're kind of getting out of just what we haven't got now and maybe exploring what happened to us back then that makes us, contributes to how we are today.
Yeah, I remember my after school one day, I was waiting for mum and dad to pick me up. I think I was 8 years old. And I was waiting outside the school, and, I was waiting for at least half an hour after school finished. And I didn't really know what to do. I mean, it was a 15-minute walk home, but I'm 8 years old, and, there's some busy roads in between the school and the house. And I was actually quite petrified after a while, because I'm like, where's mum and dad? I'm alone. Yeah. And there was no teacher, there was no nothing. And in the end, one of the neighbours picked me up and went home, and, all good. But my granddad had a stroke. So, mum and dad were in the hospital trying to sort all that out. But I'll never forget that. Like, it was a defining moment in growing up. Yeah. And another time, mum and dad went to New Zealand for 20 days and left me with the cousins, which love the cousins. They're batshit crazy, but love the cousins. But again, like, I felt like, it's good fun, but why am I here? Like, why am I not there? Yeah. So, when you look back over it, you'll find a whole bunch of defining moments that contribute to how you're showing up now.
Yeah, so important. And that's it. It's like great examples, right? We've most of us have got something, and people go, I don't really remember much. I hear this a lot. I was with someone the other day, and they were going, oh, I must have blocked it out. And they had like, at least 5. I'm like, that's perfect. Unless you really think you're blocking something out. Most people, there's kind of this thing that we must be blocking something out if we don't remember. But for a lot of people, they do have enough to kind of, have something to go on, to be able to piece together what might have happened back then, for, to point to what's going on for us now. So really key, I think, within that is that awareness around, what's going on in mind, what might have happened as we were younger. And this is, again, I don't want this to be some sort of discounting of people that want to be in relationships or want to be in better relationships. It's not about not wanting that for yourself, but just watching, is there a dependency on that? Is there a hope that there's going to be something that's going to make you feel better? I'm not going to say that there isn't. I don't want to say that. But a lot of the time, as I look around at, and I hear the stories and people in relationships, it isn't the fairy tales, that we hope they're going to be. So if there is stuff going on, in my Yeah. I mean, there's so many stories where I look back at, you know, people that I know and, you know, friends that would sit around, or they would talk about this dream of getting married and all of this stuff. And it's the reality now, 20, 30 years on, unfortunately isn't what they had hoped for back then, you know, now that they've tried it. So it's not to say don't do it, or, but if we're hoping that something's, you know, out there to save us, it's only ever really us. So, and that's kind of the power in it, as much as that can be really confronting for people. You know, for some people that can be really powerful to hear that it's actually, I can feel better now rather than when I get the things or the people or the places or the rest of it. There's something that I can do right now, which is start to reflect on what it is that's going on in mine that is, you know, that I'm struggling myself with. It's not out there. The changes can be made very quickly within us through a meditation, let's say, through taking some deep breaths, you know, whatever it is that helps you to become more quiet in mind and connecting in with yourself, with your body, with your system. So.
Yeah, that's fab. I think, you know, that opens a little bit of a line into relationships, which we probably should do a jam on at some point, you know, and what healthy and unhealthy relationships look like. And loneliness is a big driver of that phenomena.
Yeah.
But, you know, I guess, you know, I think what you're implying or saying is that, you know, if you take care of yourself and you don't need as much from your partner or the person that you're looking for out there, and you don't have a list of 400 qualities that nobody's ever going to be able to meet. And if they did, it'd be like a fable from, you know, the children's world. You stand a chance of having a really good relationship with yourself that you bring into a relationship with another human being, and that can be enriching beyond yourself. But bringing your best self is always the starting point.
Absolutely. Yeah. So then the tying back in, let's say, to the waking up of what we talked about last time is in terms of it's waking up to our mind, to our self-talk, waking up to what we're saying to ourselves on a day-to-day basis. And the more that we can wake up to what's going on internally for us, the more we can, you know, really connect in with ourselves and not be, as we said, as reliant. But it's like the waking up is the understanding of ourselves, is the understanding of how we came to be the way that we are now. So when we talked about what we talked about last time, it's kind of the more spiritual, as we say, in terms of the more silent mind. But in order to get to the more silent, we've got to recognize the noise. And through that kind of connecting in with self and understanding, that's when the experiences that may have not been that understood that we talked about last time are possible, you know, through those kind of experiences of awakening, as we start to see things, you know, more clearly without too much thinking going on. That's where there isn't anything but connection within those experiences. If people meditate, they'll probably know that it's quite a peaceful process if they're, you know, if they're getting to it, if they do breath works, potentially, whatever modality they're choosing. Most people will, if they've done it properly, will come out of it going, oh my God, that felt really good. It's because we were connected for a short period of time. We weren't lonely. There was nothing to be lonely with or about. And that's just the example that the connection is the creation of what we have, you know, manifested in those moments.
Yeah, fab. Yeah, I don't know that there's anything else to say on the waking up and connection, but, you know, if we're experiencing some form of unity or oneness, then there's really no need for connection anymore because it's already felt as living presence. And so there's no longer any void that's felt as a sensation in the body. There's no sort of longing anymore. It's, and, you know, the wholeness aspect of it, I don't know whether you wanted to say anything on that. That was one thing you mentioned at the start. But, you know, the wholeness just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So we don't have to make it too complicated. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger in terms of the integration that you're able to see. You're integrated within yourself. You're integrated in relation to other people. You're integrated in relation to other cultures and groups. You're at harmony and integrated with all of it. Yeah. And then beyond.
Yeah. Seeing less difference and more sameness in us, right? So yeah. Less arguing, right. Less pain in the world.
And or actually loving the difference. You know, like, I don't know about you, but I definitely wouldn't marry myself. Like that would be not great.
Sad thing to say, Andrew.
I mean, I love myself, but I wouldn't marry myself. I'm already with myself for my entire life. Why do I need a body double?
There's no shade on anyone that is single and feels married to themselves. Maybe that's
Maybe that's their best partner. Wherever you go, there you are. John Kabat-Zinn. I love that phrase.
Okay. All right then. Thanks all. That was actually, someone did suggest that as well, the loneliness thing. That was something that came up. So we are very open to any suggestions. If anyone wants to hear us talk about anything else, please do.
Yeah, and I'd love to know from the people that suggested it whether we actually answered the open question or whether there's anything more to explore on that too.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we'd love to hear. Let us know. All right, then see you next time.